Welcome to the RBC Sunday School Rewind. This is our Rehoboth Baptist Church Sunday School recap where we review the Sunday School lesson for the week. Please share, like, and subscribe to our channel on YouTube and on Facebook. Today's lesson facilitator was Sister Cabrina Bass. Hello, Cabrina.
Hey, Karen, how are you?
All is well. In today's lesson, Sister Cabrina covered the scriptures which focused on the birth of Moses and the courageous women who preserved his life. Now, I have a warning. Today's rewind will be a little longer than usual, so grab your popcorn and pay attention to this particularly challenging and thought-provoking lesson review. Now, viewer discretion is advised because this lesson may be triggering. So our lesson aim for today, and we had a wonderful discussion. Our lesson aim for today was to identify the deep injustices that imperiled Moses's life and promoted his family's clever and creative care for him. We empathize with the struggles that the families today who find themselves in seemingly impossible situations due to brokenness and societal injustices, and we will advocate to address structural injustice on behalf of loved ones who are endangered. Now, Cabrina, there's a common thread running through our lesson aims for today. Do you want to point those out?
I sure do. One of the things we found is this thing called justices, right? And so in each of today's aim, each of them pointed us toward a different type of injustice. And so when we look at it, it really emphasized, and I felt real comfortable that members of our class identified those. Not only do we have these deep injustices that we are called to identify, but we also are called to empathize in relationship to the societal injustices, right? These things that are created through our systems and our structures. And then the last one is actually structural injustice. And so when you look at our aim for the day, it's really for us to look at injustice. And so how do we look at these different types of injustices?
All right. So when we started our lesson today, you actually introduced it with an exercise that you walked us through on decision making. Can you recap that here?
Oh, sure can, Karen. I thought this was amazing and engaging. So what I asked the class to do was to think about some decisions that they had to make. And on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 meaning this is really easy decision, doesn't take much for me to make this decision, and 5, you know, and I'm gonna need some more things in order for me to make this decision, so it's a little bit more difficult. So the first thing was your neighbor needs some sugar. Everybody was like, oh, that's easy. That's an easy decision to make. The second one, your friend needs you to help them to move. That wasn't as easy as giving somebody some sugar. And then the third one is that your church wants you to oversee a special offering for a local charity. Now we started to see that scale of difficulty really starting to move, and different people on different levels of the scale. Some people think that's an easy thing to do, but some people found that a level 4 thing to do. And then it was the pastors asked you to go on an overseas mission trip. Once again, depending on the person, some people that was an easy ask, but other people it was a little bit more difficult. And I think we had a couple people that even it was a 5. It was extremely difficult. And then the last one was you have been nominated to lead a local citizen group to address a neighborhood concern. That one, everybody tend to be toward the more difficult side. And when we asked the question about the factors that they had that played in on this decision, one of the factors specifically with helping somebody to move was physical ability. Everybody in our class may not have the physical ability to help someone to move. We also had time, commitment, other things, family matters. There's so many factors that play into making decisions. And so I use this to remind us that today's lesson was about a family that had to make a decision. And so that led us into today's lesson.
Yeah, powerful lesson on today. So you already talked about the aims that had the common thread of injustices. And Cabrina, I'm going to say you dropped on us a powerful video that you're definitely going to have to include in the comments under this particular recap so everyone else will have a chance to watch it. Can you tell us about that video?
Karen, oh my God, yes, I could definitely talk to this video. This video, I actually found it, trying to figure out how do you explain to people injustices, societal, specifically injustice. And this video is actually called the Unequal Opportunity Race. And it was created by the African American Policy Forum to really talk about structural reform within our systems. So the race starts out with 4 people. There's 4 basic people, a white male, a white female, and the male could be a black male, an Asian male, or a Hispanic male, and a black female, right? And so they're all starting in this race. Well, the clock for the race is a 4-digit number, right? And so when the race first starts, the clock starts at 1492, I believe, and they start running the race. But when the race starts, the black female and the person of color male, both of them receive a stoplight. And the white male and the white female, they're running the race and the clock is moving. And again, it begins to go to like 16, 19, 17, 8. And then you realize that clock is the years that are passing by. And please note, the 2 figures on the outer end of the race, they don't get to start to run until that clock hits 1964. 1964. The other people started the race in 1492. They don't get to be part of the race until 1964, which is, I think for me, it's that flag that the civil rights was passed. So now you have access to the race. You get access to start running. So they start running, you get excited, like, yeah, they're in the race, they're in the race. Now I got to flashback a little bit because the other 2, as they were running the race, specifically the white male, is that when 17 something comes around, which I think is the start of slavery, he begins to acquire wealth. And then his wealth is from generation to generation as he runs. But the other 2 aren't even in the race while this white male is collecting wealth. And some people say, well, why is only the guy collecting the wealth? Because the policies and procedures in life did not allow the woman, any woman, white or black or any kind of person, they couldn't collect no wealth. So they get no wealth. So only the white male is accumulating his wealth while everybody else is still in the race. The 2 on the outside can't run the race, but the woman is running with them, but she does not get the wealth. So when the other 2 finally get in there, you be like, yeah, they're in the race. But then all these obstacles come up. They get discrimination. They get hit with underfunded school system. They get hit with unemployment. And then the pipeline of prison. That right there, I think for me, was the moment where I lost my own breath. Because the male person of color gets incarcerated and he's taken out of the race. So he really doesn't even get to be a part of the race any longer. And the black female is still running the race. And she's came over all these, she blocked the prison thing. She gets through this and she falls into that, but she comes out of it. And then she finally gets a place to rest, but that place to rest would be a home. But because of housing discrimination, she's not even allowed to rest there. And because of all the stress of this race, she dies. And so you'd be like, man, so her race stops. So basically the last 2 that got into the race at the end because they were held back by systems, finally getting the race, one gets incarcerated and the other one dies. And so the other 2 are still running. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, comes this conveyor belt. It's this belt that's built on the track, on one track, and it's the white male track, right? And it increases his speed, and he's flying past the white woman. And you're like, what in the world is that? It's his privilege. Because he's a white male, he doesn't even have to run the rest the way the white female has to run. And she, too, gets left behind. So when the race ends, he wins the race. And so really, is this a full race of opportunity for everybody? Is it equal for everybody? And so how does this have to do with Moses' story? It's the fact that the race for Moses started with social injustice, but his family helped him to overcome that, Karen. So I thought it was important to share that, seeing today's lesson in the scope of these injustices that play out throughout life, throughout generations, and throughout centuries is important for us to understand a lesson that happened over 4,000 years ago.
Yeah, that was such a great introduction to our lesson today. And it definitely set the stage for the review of our scriptures. So do you want to talk a little bit about what actually happened in today's scriptures, Cabrina?
Yeah, I think today's lesson, and I always say, I think most people know the story of Moses, right? We know about this great deliverance story, but today's lesson I thought was very interesting. And the reason I thought it was interesting, because the authors of our lesson chose to demonstrate these women in the life of Moses. His mother,
Jochebed.
Jochebed, thank you so much. Jochebed, Miriam, and Pharaoh's daughter. So we got three women that are inside of this lesson. And shout out to Brother Deacon Buford. The family is as a whole was important, but for some reason the authors found it necessary just to talk about the women. But these women did a lot of things. His mother, and once she gave birth to him, she hid him for 3 months so that he would gain some strength in some of the things our students talked about, our participants. And then she put him in this thing called an ark bush basket. And so the ark bush basket is made of ark material. And if you know anything about Noah's Ark, you would assume that's that type of material that can take water. And so she put him in a basket that could float on water. So she wasn't worried about him drowning. She covered it in cloth and everything and placed her baby in there. But she did not only secure a container for the baby, put a cover over it, but she then sent her daughter to follow that container to see where it ended. So she wanted to know the destiny of her child. One of the things I talked about is that we missed the fact of the daughter following the basket, right? So that's important to this whole thing. And the basket lands at Pharaoh's daughter, which we know about, and she takes him in. The daughter asks, can she find her a nursing maid? And Pharaoh's daughter agrees. And so the baby Moses is literally taken back to his mom to be nursed until he's of age. But our lesson also tells us he's then returned back to Pharaoh's house where he grows there and becomes a young man. And so that's pretty much our biblical story.
Yeah, it was a great example of some of the risk and everything that was involved in making those decisions. You asked several thought-provoking questions in our lesson. And I'd love for you to kind of elaborate on what the response was from the class on those. Do you want to show your question? So what risks are involved in addressing societal injustices through nonviolent civil disobedience?
So first of all, I really wanted to break down this question because it's got some big concepts inside of here. Social injustices, nonviolent civil disobedience. What does that mean? So the best way for me to break this down into a language that's understandable for all and to, I think, remove some assumptions about what we're talking about. So what are the risks involved in Moses's mother, right, addressing the social injustice of all male children under 3 being killed? That's a social injustice. And how does she do that? Through a nonviolent civil disobedience. She decided not to kill her baby. She decided to put him in a basket and to float him down a river. So that's a nonviolent civil disobedience. She did not let her baby get killed. She hid the baby and then she set him down through the river, right? So the question to the class was, what risks are involved in addressing social injustices through nonviolent civil disobedience? And we really talked about the fact it's the risk of life. That you risk your life sometime when you address these social injustices. You can be locked up by the police and lose your freedom. You could be killed by somebody because you stand up to a social injustice, or you can lose resources that you have that are important to you. Some of the nonviolent civil disobedience is the fact of refusing to follow the law, of doing some things that will be considered illegal, but they're illegal because they are against the societal injustices that have been placed before us. And so we really talked about a lot of different risks that are involved inside of that.
Yeah, that was really good. I think somebody put in the chat that brought to their mind John Lewis's book, Good Trouble.
Yeah. Time to get into some good trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. So after we talked about the question, you then wanted us to look back at the story of Jochebed, Miriam, and Pharaoh's daughter, and what is the dilemma that they face. So can you walk us through this?
Yeah, so I put these questions back up and we really didn't talk through a lot of them because we had already talked pretty much through most of them. But the real question was, like, with his mom, why did she choose to make this ark a bush rush, right? For the baby, because she knew that it wouldn't sink. So she understood what she was dealing with, and she understood the danger that her son had. But I think the question for every one of these characters is, what do your actions, what do their actions teach us about justice and compassion? So Jochebed, her actions really taught us about compassion for her family. She had compassion, and for her, justice was to make sure that her child survived. And so in her acts of justice, it was to create a space for him that would cover him, to have his sister protect him, right? To follow him, and to make sure that he was kept safe by hiding him. So she did those acts of justice for her. And then when we get to Miriam, I like the first question: what degree was possible for Miriam as she approached Pharaoh's daughter? She walked up to the Pharaoh's daughter, like the king's daughter. And most of us know from a cultural standpoint, you don't just get to walk up to the king's daughter. I mean, so for her to risk her life to walk up and say something to her was very risky for her. And the second thing is, when we talk about her protection of her brother in his trip down the river, we don't know how long he went down the river. The Bible just tells us he went down and it drifted into, but we don't know how long that was. And so if you think about the terrain that she may have had to travel, the bushes and the thorns and the animals, and she risked her life to follow this basket, right? And so we have to look at her courage. And so when we look at her, what does it teach us about justice? Is that it ain't easy, and that we got to follow through no matter what obstacles come in our way. And our compassion has to not only be toward those that we care about, but for those that may be engaged with those that we care about. And so that was important to us. And then lastly, we got to Pharaoh's daughter. Oh my God, this woman literally goes against her own father's rule, a rule that he set for the society. And she knew. The Bible tells us that she knew that this child was a Hebrew child, which means she knew he was to die, but she did not do that. She had compassion toward him. The Bible literally says he cried and she had compassion. And so I think what her actions teaches us is that I think my main thing is just because a government official or a leader makes a proclamation or makes something that's unjust does not mean that his entire family made that decision or her family made that decision. So we can't judge people by the actions of family members, of their family members, but hold them to their own actions. So she shows us that in this, that we shouldn't assume that everybody is in agreement with one action on one. So that was number one for me. I think the other thing that she teaches us inside of this lesson is that compassion for the quote unquote underserved, for those that are discriminated against. She showed us that being in the majority culture, you can be compassionate. You can care about somebody. You can care about those that people in your mainstream don't care for. And so I think she really lifted that up. And so I found this part of the lesson, which we didn't have time to go into groups to talk about it, but I found it very enlightening. I found the responses from it to be extremely amazing.
Yeah, I did too. And you know, again, looking at Moses's mother, Jochebed, you know, her stance was doing nothing was not an option. She was not willing to let her son die. So she had to take some kind of action. And then when you look at Miriam, you know, she followed through to the end. She followed her brother down the river. She did what she had to do and ended up bringing the brother back to the mother to be nursed. And then, like you just stated on Pharaoh's daughter, that she was willing to stand up. You know, she was in the majority and looking down on those the Hebrews, but she was willing to make a different choice, take that risk, and stand up against what her father had decreed that needed to happen. So you also had another interesting question. Speaking of the role, what is the community of faith role in this particular process, and there were some very interesting comments that came out as a result of this question.
Yeah, this question was really, really good to me because I think that word community of faith, and Deacon Buford did a phenomenal job of talking about this community of faith. So I'll start with the positive side, is that we have a role to play in when it says this process of addressing injustices. What is our role in addressing injustices? And somebody said we need to speak up. Yeah, we need to speak up. They talked about we need to follow through, right? And one of the things I said as they were shouting out all these answers is set up, you know, you're being set up for something in the future, right? Because their responses were right on key to what it is that we must do and should be doing when it comes to injustice. We're not And I love the fact that nobody said pray about it. Because praying about it is important, but it's going to take actions, follow up, follow through, stepping up, saying something. We must do those things. But Deacon Buford brought to our remembrance that sometimes it's the community of faith that causes the injustices. And so we talked about free will. We talked about God gave us free will, and we have to be careful not to stand on the side of those systems or those practices that deny people the opportunity to exercise their free will. And we did use the abortion issue as one, stating that as believers, we pretty much don't believe in abortion. But does that give us the right to stop other people from exercising their desire to do what it is that's best for them and their family? And then if we start with that one free choice, then do we have a choice to decide who can marry? And then you brought up the fact of the Lovely case where a white male was denied the opportunity to marry his Black wife, right? And so and people want to market it from the standpoint of homosexuality as that thing that we don't want to see happen. But when we take that freedom away, we can also take the freedom away of whoever you choose to marry. In fact, we can come down to a caste system that India used, that if this person doesn't make a certain amount of income, you cannot marry them, regardless if you love them or not. So I think inside of this question, we really flushed out the importance of the community of faith to be compassionate and to exercise those types of things related to justice.
Yeah, that was a great discussion, because it is a slippery slope. You know, you turn your back here and sooner or later it's going to be at your front door. So as we talk about justice, how do we create justice? We did go into that discussion, and you had a great graphic that demonstrated that. Can you show that and then walk through this with everyone?
Oh my God. So I always talk about there's this wonderful image that has a fence and a baseball game, and it has a short kid and a tall kid, a medium-sized kid, and some of them even have a kid with a ableism, and they're in a wheelchair, right? So they're not even able to stand at all. So in this imagery, there's this injustice. And so how do you create, because we believe, a lot of people believe all we need to do is create equality, and equality says we give everybody the same thing. Well, in the case of this apple tree, the injustice, inequality is that the tree tends to lean to one side. And because it leans to this one side, it produces more apples on that side. And so it leans further over toward that side, and the other side doesn't produce as many apples, and it's further away from anybody to pick the apples. So equality says we give everybody a ladder, right? So everybody has the same size ladder. Well, that doesn't fix it, because even though they're on the same size ladder, they don't have the ability to reach the tree still, and the tree is still leaning and producing better on one side. So then we said, well, we need equity. So one person get a taller ladder. The tree still is bending. It's still not producing at the same level. And although they can get the apple, they still can't get as much as the other person, which that brings into this still injustice, right? So as people of faith, the community of faith, we have to start to create justice. And in this example, straightening up the tree, pulling the tree on both sides, tilting it toward the other side and anchoring it down, which is an action of follow through. Now both sides got equal access on the same size ladder to the tree. But guess what? The tree now has the ability to produce an equal amount of fruit, so everybody gets the same thing. So it's not just to create equality or equity. It's about us as community of faith creating justice, which means we got to maybe do something to the system, the tree that's causing the injustice that's around us.
Just powerful. I don't even need to add anything to that. But I will say this to underline what you just said. We have to look at the systems that are in place in order and make changes there, and not just give them a taller ladder. So that was an awesome graphic. So you ended up with the now what assignment and gave us some homework for next week. What's the homework assignment?
So we want people to identify in our community. And so for you that's listening to this, who may not be in the same community we are in Rehoboth, maybe you're living somewhere else, you're still part of this assignment. So identify an area in your community that is a cause of conflict or oppression among people that are vulnerable. And when we talk about vulnerable people, it's people that we just talked about through this whole lesson that don't have the access. Pharaoh's daughter having more access than Moses' mother. So we talk about those people like Moses' mother that are vulnerable because of societal laws and conditions that keep them from being there. But think about that population in your community, then through prayer and the reading of scripture. So pray about it. Look at God's word and see what it said. Determine if a just cause. So you need to we need to create the response to this injustice. How do you respond to this situation and commit to the follow through, committing to the follow through. And so this is something that's left in each person's own thing. It's something that you should do on your own. What are you willing to do to somewhat create the justice, just as in the image of the tree? What are you going to do to lean that tree the right way so that everybody can have access, depending on whatever that situation is in your community?
That was just part one. You had a part two.
Yeah.
What?
Part two was about the world, because we have our injustices in our community, but there's also injustices in our world. And so we were looking at thinking about children worldwide. What is an organization that we could support that provides a worldwide holistic approach? In other words, thinking about the whole child, not just one area. Like some people want to look at organizations that help with housing. Well, housing is great, but what if they can't eat? Housing is great, but what if they can't read? So really thinking about organization that does that wraparound service for children and family that really can address those systemic issues that causes families and specifically their children not to prosper and experience equal justice.
So that was a lot. That was a heavy lesson on today. And I think your last slide just kind of put the cherry on top for us. Don't forget to remember.
Yeah.
So talk about that a little bit.
So one of the things is when we think about all these lessons that we learned from Moses and his family and things of that thing, is that God's people must always be mindful of the human tendency to forget to remember how good God has been. God blessed them. He blessed from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, even down to Moses. And he blesses us. I mean, our culture, most of us can trace back our ancestry to Africa and enslavement. And we've been blessed because we're still here today and not prospering as others are in this country, but at least we are surviving, right? And so we must never forget to say thank you. And so Moses' final words to Israel before he dies is to caution them not to repeat the sins of their ancestors in the spirit of ingratitude. So always remember to be grateful for what God has done. And so as we move into our next lesson, it's that don't forget to remember that God is still good. Regardless of what your situations are, what's going on in life, God is still good.
Yes, he is. Thank you, Cabrina. As we promised, this was a challenging and a thought-provoking lesson, and it may have been triggering for some people. Our next week's lesson is going to be expressing thankfulness, and it's going to come from the book of Deuteronomy. And we're asking you to read chapter 31 and 32 so that you're prepared for next week's lesson. So that's our Sunday School Rewind for today. We want to thank each of you for joining us as we recap this week's lesson. You can join us live via Zoom for next week's Sunday School lesson, or you can catch the rewind here on YouTube. And we hope that you've enjoyed it. So we ask that you please like the lesson, like this video, share it, and comment on the lesson in the chat. You can do that on YouTube, on Facebook, or in Rehoboth's members only realm. Sister Cabrina, you want to give us the last word?
The last word is that systemic injustices are real. And so we do have the power through our voice and our vote to make changes. So be careful who you're following and to be mindful of the platforms in which they're standing on, and make sure that they're in line with social justice, not injustice.
Thank you.